demographic, maybe I'll use Pinterest rather than something else. There's a sort of, I think initially when Twitter started, there was a general sense that Twitter was a little bit more of a sort of, kind of post-school, university, college educated, kind of, cognoscenti, digerati, call it what you will. Slightly broader now, but probably not too far from that. So is your general audience, is your GP on Twitter? Possibly not, but you will have a group of people who are potentially very influential who are on Twitter, but they are not necessarily representative of your total demographic. So you might talk to them on Twitter slightly differently than you would talk to a more general audience in another channel. And what actions and pathways do we want them to take? So be considerate before you start. When somebody comes and likes me on Facebook or likes a comment, what do we want them to do next? What is the actual journey that we want to take people on realistically? Where do we want to steer them? Okay, if they come in and take that little bit, that entry point over here, what's the next entry point? Where do we want to push them next? And what is the sort of journey that we want to go to? Now, you'll have noticed only at slide 2 that I'm not giving you any answers. I'm just giving you a whole bunch of questions. All right? But the job here is to, I guess, arm you with enough questions that you yourself will write those answers and have digital strategy. So let's look at story. What's your story and who's telling it? So this was the kind of, this one slide was the focus of my presentation, which took an hour last year, so I'll try not to make it an hour this time. This idea of your narrative of past, present, and future. Now, arts marketing, unless you're in extremely, sort of super interesting positions with a super interesting organization, which I'm sure you will claim to be, can be quite a transient, thing. You might do 2-3 years somewhere and then move on to another organization and so on and so forth. Right? We're all quite well aware of that, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. But when we step into an organization on the 1st of July on our first day, what has gone before us? What is the history of that organization? Because we can't walk in on the 1st of July and pick up the reins of Twitter and start talking, because we've no idea what's happened before. Now, somebody tweeted during that last session a really good question for Lisa, which was, how do you account for succession planning on social media accounts? Really interesting idea. Because it's still quite nascent and a lot of people have only picked it up in the last couple of years, it hasn't really, to a lot of people, started to raise that question, but I think now we're having to start to ask that question. If you have somebody who's furiously brilliant on Twitter and then they leave the organization, what happens? Okay, because that person in the box office might not be the next person to pick up the mantle, but maybe they are. Okay, you never thought about them, but they're brilliant on Twitter, so why don't they do it? So this idea of succession planning is really interesting. But also, your organization has years, if not decades, of history that have gone before. And it's our job as people who are telling the story to understand the past, to get in there and get our hands dirty. Now, I was really lucky when I was at the Royal Court in London. It was celebrating its 50th anniversary.